Hi, 102. I'm back. I lost power on my phone, so I'm recording the second half of the lecture right now. I brought up something called plug and chug earlier. So, just a quick review over what we discussed in the first half of this lecture. We talked about probability, we talked about rhetoric, and we talked about argument. We talked about logos, pathos, and ethos. We talked about deduction, and we also talked about um, ampliative rhetoric, induction, and abduction. What else did we talk about? We talked about deduction being taking from the general and making inferences about the particular. Induction is taking from the particular and making inferences about the general. Beyond that, hold it, Doug, Otis, stop. Beyond that, we also have a way to write your essay. Oh, yeah, validity and soundness. We covered that too. We have a way to write your essay. And I would like to cover this because this is useful. This is really, really useful. You're going to find this incredibly useful. I call it the plug and chug method. You can sit down and you can write until your brain is turned to mush. You can sit down and you can write until your brain is turned to mush and churn out something that's garbage. You can do that. You can work very hard at not doing well. I would like for you to save yourself a fair amount of time. I would like for you to save yourself a fair amount of energy. I would like you to put all of your energy into telling me something amazing. I'd like you to put all of your energy into analysis. I'd like you to put all of your energy into producing something of value. With producing something of value, it takes a lot of consideration. It takes a lot of knowledge. It takes the ability to make novel connections. And if you're just scribbling stuff down, you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. It will take you forever. I'm not innocent in this myself. I used to write like that. I used to write like I need to impress someone. I need to demonstrate my own sense of worth through people looking at the the number of syllables and the length of each sentence for some semblance of how pretty this is. Look at the flourish that we have here. And I was just blowing smoke up other people's asses. And I know that people have blown smoke up my ass by saying, look how pretty my writing is. But as I said in the first half of this lecture, show me, don't tell me. Don't tell me you're a good writer. Don't tell me that you know what you're talking about. Show me that you know what you're talking about. And you could take a fair amount of time trying to show me. And in the end, you're neither showing me nor telling me. You're just giving me a pile of words and thoughts, something that is not organized well, something that needs a lot of work. And I don't want you to suffer through this process. I do not, I'm not interested in your suffering. I'm interested in your ideas. So the ideas are what matters here. I had previously brought this up in class. This is what is called plug and chug. Effectively, with plug and chug, what you want to do, this is a good rule of thumb. This is also a wonderful starting place. If you're doing an academic journal, of course, it's going to be a little different. You have an abstract. That's a short summary of what is going to be in your paper, the abstract. And then you have an intro. This is where the big question is. This is where your thesis is. Then you have a lit review. And You go forward and you talk about your data and your methods. Then you do your analysis, and then you give me a conclusion. And you can also have a discussion in here. And of course, you have your works cited. You're giving me something. You're giving me something that ultimately you're adding commentary to a discourse. That's what we do in political science. We don't necessarily work to reinvent the wheel. We look at the wheel and we tweak the wheel to make it better. And if the wheel is flawed, oh, we can undermine the wheel and we could come up with something better. But we don't do that on our own. If you're a loner, if you are not interested in working with other people and you think that your ideas outshine everyone else, with rare exception, you don't belong here. But if you look at what we're doing, this eminently social enterprise, what we're doing is we're sharing. We have the same standards. Ideally, we have the same standards of rigor, methodology, what I said previously about type 1 and type 2 errors, the scientific method, the particular procedures for doing critical discursive analysis, qualitative content analysis, et cetera, et cetera. We have different methods we employ. We have case studies, matched comparisons, quasi experiments, and experiments. And we have this shared vocabulary specifically so we can better communicate and better work together on refining an idea and going after the idea for its own merits, not for our own aggrandizement. So we aren't doing an academic journal article this semester. You might never write one, but if you do, it's going to look like that. Ideally, you can go outside of the structure, but this is how we typically see them. And like I've said previously in other classes, in any field of study that you might venture into, there is a vocabulary. Why? Because we need a shorthand, we need little signposts so we can get right to the point and get to work. And we would like to communicate. Our ideal is to communicate quickly and effectively so we can work on what the data say, we can work on what, looking through the lens of history, what the authorities on a particular subject have covered, and we want to add our distinct voice to this greater chorus. It's lovely if you think about it. As I was saying, this is eminently social. This is a beautiful, wonderful enterprise where we work to push each other to be our best, at least in the most ideal of circumstances. It doesn't always work that way. But, well, this is how we can do this. And I think that this might not only be a recourse against doing a poor job in this class, but also doing a not so great job elsewhere. There and there. Okay. Just wanted to see. All right. How are we going to write our essay? So, writing our essay later for the semester project, I'm going to expect this. Where am I? I'm going to expect an abstract, and that's a paragraph summary. You don't have to do that on this. This is an essay test. It's not an actual full essay. That's coming later. No matter what you're doing for your semester project, I would like to see an abstract. Not only would I like to see the abstract, this is a really great way to put this together. We're going to have our intro section, and one rule of thumb that I like to use when I'm writing is your intro has your thesis. This is your big idea. This is your claim. This is what you're saying and why it's worth my time to read it and why it's worth your time to write it. This justifies why you're doing this project. regardless if you're being conscripted into doing this project or any project like a lot of classes will have, or if you're being commissioned to do so through a job, or you're just enlisting your faculties of reason and creativity in order to do this for personal enrichment. You're going to have your big question. This is your thesis. Additionally, section 2, for those who are unfamiliar with Roman numerals, and it's probably not showing up very well in here, so I'm going to try to change this. Like I said, I am new to videos, so let's just make this happen. All right, here we go. So, here. There, good, I can see that. So you have your intro, and with your intro, this is where your thesis is, this is where your claim. So let's say we're writing about if we feel that the electoral process no longer is no longer remotely democratic, specifically because we have tech companies. This is not necessarily a true statement. It might be a true statement. This is a purely hypothetical example. So let's say that our thesis is the democratic system that we have is no longer democratic. Okay, so what do I need for this? I would recommend, because we're doing a persuasive essay, and I always like to play to logic when I write these logos, and especially because we have a persuasive element to a couple of the questions on the exam. But we could do this in a purely objective, technically descriptive manner. We can state our claim, and from our claim, we can build up to justifying it. So with this, I would say I would like to have 3 points to justify what I'm saying. And of course, your essay or your work might go beyond this. And if it does, use this pattern just for the sake of getting yourself unstuck. Use this as a scaffolding, as a lattice of sorts. So that way, when you're writing, when you're thinking, you have everything clearly laid out. Everything clearly laid out. I'm going to expand these out a little bit more. So 2, 3. For those who don't know, those are Roman numerals. We use Roman numerals when we're doing something in order often, or if we have different large things, a set of different large prominent things like World War I, World War II, and ideally not World War III. So democratic system is no longer democratic. That is my thesis. How am I going to argue this? How am I going to argue this? I can go in, I can talk about democracy and what a democratic system is. So why not? I'll have this is what democracy is. Okay, this is a great point. Our democratic system is no longer democratic. And then I can choose another point. When was it democratic? And is it democratic now? I can work with this. Additionally, I'm going to put a good signposting up here. And by signposting, I mean I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, plus the conclusion. When you're writing like this, what you're doing is you're being kind to your reader. You're being kind to your reader in regards that they don't have to go searching for this. For a creative writing class, that's fantastic. Go to town and meander and throw a twist. But for something like this, I don't want a twist. I don't have time for a twist. You don't have time for a twist. I want you to get right to the point. democratic system, our democratic system, I'm putting our democratic system is not, is we're no longer democratic. Okay? So, what is democracy? Let's figure this out. We can get ancient democracy, looks like. We can get waves of democracy. And those things are like the first wave, France, the United States. Then we go to other countries pre World War One, and then second half of 20th century, third wave democracies. And we can say, what do they look like? And then we could say the qualities of them, and we can break that down further. I would say we have um, a procedural and a normative aspect of democracy. We've talked about that before. Procedural democracy would be like China. You vote. But those qualities of a democracy, those essential elements that, much like air, you don't notice them until they're gone. You don't notice them until they're gone. So these essential features of democracy, such as procedural is one person, one vote, and voting. We like ex post facto uncertainty, or uncertainty after the, like we like to have, um, we don't like to know the outcome of elections before someone votes. Normative side, where's all that good stuff of democracy that we love? Go to The Economist, they have their democracy index. We also, I think we talked about this the other day in class as well, that there's a think tank that's saying that autocracies now outnumber democracies for the first time in quite a long time. So, what does it look like? What democracy looks like? And we can say, are we a democracy? And we can say, what is a democracy? What's democracy? What does it look like? And then we can say, are we one? We can give examples. We can say, yes, but, or yes, we were, but aren't now, or we're a flawed democracy. And I always like to have 3 to 5 points of substantiating information, because if I'm just coming up with something and I'm just trying to support what I'm saying rather than the other way around, I'm not being honest. I'm being an advocate for my own bias and perspective. What I want to do is I want to ask this question: what is a democracy? Well, let's define it. Then we'll go over here, and then we'll say, well, here's the elements of democracy, and of course, you'll find sources like um, Robert Dahl, Who Governs. He's a great source. So you go and you find sources. You look up books. You look up journal articles. You look at encyclopedias, and you find definitions. You find the most commonly accepted definition, because if you're trying to argue something and you take something niche, if you take something novel, if you take something that the average person who actually studies and works in this field would not otherwise recognize, they're going to laugh you out the door. But also, you're not engaging in honest discourse. Then we go over to the question: what does democracy look like? So this is the definition. The classical third wave democracy, we can say democracy in general, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is the definition of democracy, and here's what it looks like. So let me go figure out what it looks like. I know this because I've read Sawersky, I've read Dahl, et cetera, et cetera. So I have a fair understanding of democracy in general. So I would say procedural and normative. And I gave an example a moment ago of The Economist, Robert Dahl as sources, Freedom House, and looking at this saying, well, you can have voting, but does that necessarily make a country a democracy? Keep in mind, I am not putting a value statement behind democracies being good or bad while I'm writing this essay. I just want to see the question: are we still a democracy? I brought up that one particular testing theories of bias pluralism in American politics, the Gillen and Page American Inequality Study. I brought that up. And the one from 2014, that goes in here too. That's a great source because they'll define what democracy is and who votes, and like Robert Dahl says in his book, both on democracy and who governs. We want to see who governs. So we see this, we'll define democracy, we'll define our use of democracy here, because if we're going to argue something, we want to have an acceptable definition, both accepted by the people who are experts in the field and something that the reader can reasonably affirm is a good working definition of democracy. So then what I have here is I can say, well, are we a democracy? That's our big question from our first section. What's a democracy? That's our first point. Are Then are we a democracy? And that's our second point. And then third point is when? When were we a democracy? And that might bleed over to my second point here, to point two of the three. But this could be a good transition. This could be a good transition. I could stop it there, and I could move this down. But we could say, are we one? And we can look at this and we can say, according to these standards, at the start of the country, we like to call ourselves a democracy. But if more than 50% of the people in this country were not allowed to vote, could we reasonably consider ourselves a democracy? If we didn't have the 19th Amendment that conferred the franchise onto half the population, where the 19th Amendment from 1920 was clearly stating that voting cannot be discriminated on the basis of sex, could we necessarily consider ourselves democratic before then? If we had property qualifications to vote, not just being a citizen, but up until a point, we had property qualifications to vote. You had to be a property holder. You might have had to pay a poll tax. You might have had to take a literacy test. If we substantially burdened a particular group of people because of a quote unquote immutable characteristic, were we a democracy? Because up until 1965, with the Voting Rights Act, we made it really, 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 really difficult for certain people to vote, largely on the basis of skin color. Um, so the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we talk about the Constitution, we talk about the 19th Amendment. We all have these little bits of examples, and we can see how voting has changed in the US over time. And then we could look at the aggregate to say, from this point, what do we call that? 1776 with the Declaration, 1777 with the Articles of Confederation, 1787 US Constitution. What is this? When did we start? When did we start as a democracy? Or looking at the state of democracy, were we a democracy then? With what we would otherwise recognize as democracy, that the work that we did was so fundamentally different than what other people were doing at the time that just by its revolutionary nature, not to coin a pun based on the American Revolution, based on the revolutionary nature of this concept alone, were we an outstanding democracy, not necessarily condemning ourselves with an indictment based on temporal circumstances or the flow of time. So, how has this changed over time? Okay, then we look here. When was it democratic? When was it democratic? As you can see, I can even break this down even more. So, under item 2, I can say, what is a democracy? What's the definition of democracy? What does a democracy look like in action? And then say, have we ever been one? These are my 3 points, A, B, C. And as I was going over that, you saw I was citing different conceptions. We do the same thing. When was it democratic? So if it's we have been at one time, or if it is a pathway leading to being more democratic, we can say no, but we're becoming one, increasingly so. Or democracies are never perfect. Or yes, we had a greater focus on this until recently, And was it ever democratic? So this is a good transition to two. Um, so the second point, when was it democratic? And we can look at this in our conception of yes or no. And let's just say we say no, but getting better. Why is that? Why is that? It's because we can look at voting laws. We can also look at the impact of the electorate. How much efficacy or how much power does the electorate actually have? And then we can say voting laws impact the electorate, and then we could say trends, maybe a trends. I think that that might be an interesting place to look. And then, is it democratic now? And if the answer was no, um, we can look back. Our democratic system, and our initial thought was no longer, but we can also change that because we're looking at what is actually there. We have the structure to help us explore and investigate, and we can say our democratic system is no longer democratic, but then looking at this, what if we discover it never was truly democratic? We can say, um, let's see, is it democratic now? We can say in comparison to other countries. We can say trends, and we can make a guess and likelihood of democratization or democratic atrophy. That's another term when democracy starts falling apart. Democratic atrophy. And with this in mind, we take all of this right here, and I just wrote an essay. Over the last 10 minutes, I just put an essay together. It might be challenging if you haven't done this yet, and that's understandable. That's why we do a lot of writing, is so we can get good at this. But we get better faster if we do this in a way that we can concentrate on the quality of our work. We can concentrate on the quality of our work, then we can get better faster, and we can get to the point, and we have something where we can share it with a learned individual, and that learned individual can look at what we've done, and they can point out what is more substantial or flawed in our line of thinking. How, you missed the point on that thing entirely. So we have our intro, and our intro is um, our democracy is no longer democratic. That's our thesis. Our point was, what is a democracy, and are we one? Are we democracy? Point one. So then point two, then we can say, um, were we ever one? Point three, are we one now? And see how this builds? Asking if we are a democracy, then saying, were we ever a democracy? And say, how close to a democracy are we? And then I come down here with for a conclusion. And our points so far was a definition of democracy as a proper definition. Then we have a working definition of democracy, and this is the procedural and normative side. And then we ask the question, are we one? And then from here, were we ever one? And then we can say, looking at this model of democracy that we see from The Economist or Freedom House on what determines the place of the United States in our political culture and the panoply of other countries that might infer that we are a democracy, we can say, were we ever one? Yes, no, or yes, but, no, but. All right. And then how are we going to substantiate it? A few points of substantiating information. Yes, no. Were we ever a democracy? Yes, no, depending on what your conclusion is. And from there, were we ever a democracy? If it was, you can break it down early on and say, evaluate, more or less, and then you find examples. And like I said, we have the US Constitution, and we considered people under the bounds of chattel slavery as three-fifths of a person. And we had African Americans who were freed persons, but we didn't have everybody. We also didn't have women having the right of the vote until 1920, and then we go up to, what year was it? 1971, I think, with 18-year-olds getting the right to vote. And also, we can ask, like, who gets to vote? So, were we ever one? See how I'm thinking about this as we go along. Um, So can we qualify this? So are we one? We can go to looking at who gets franchised that's voting. Then we can say, well, we're evaluating it, and then we can go, were we ever one? We can look at our past, our start of the country. We can look at mid-level past, like Civil War. So Revolutionary War. So we can look at the 18th century, late 17th, or excuse me, late 18th, early 19th century. We can look at, yeah, then we can look at 19th century to Civil War, and then we can go 19th century through 21st century. And this thing could be marked by the Civil Rights Movement. This could be marked by the Civil War. This could be marked by the American Revolution. This could also be marked by um, the work that government officials did against First Nation people here. It could be a lot of things, but we can say, like now we can break it down like that. Were we ever one? And we've created our model to discuss, who gets it? What's the definition of democracy? Are we a democracy? Yes or no, or yes, no, or to some extent, were we ever one? We look at our particular focus here and we move it down here: past, mid past, and now, long ago, mid past, and now. And then, are we one now? And then this can lead us to our next point, which is, are we one now? And let's say, on paper, are we a democracy by our laws? Socially, are we a democracy by our attitudes and by the effect of the system? Are we a democracy by how it plays out in the street? And we can look at this and say yes or no. We can also look at other people who have defined what democracy is in practice, and we can go from there and we cite them. And if this is what our standard that we're looking at, because right here I came up with something that would be an interesting essay that I would write for fun. Um, so looking at this, I'll know where to go and where to look. Here's my question, and here's what I would otherwise need to know to figure that question out. And with needing to know to figure that question out, I'll go read everything I can get my greasy little hands on, my sticky, greasy little mitts on, to go and investigate. And I'm going to see what's been said, and I'm going to evaluate in all of this. And have you noticed that each of these things is a bullet point? I can evaluate right there like that. Then my conclusion and my thesis: our democratic system is no longer democratic. And then because, um, according to the definition of democracy, we kind of were. Over time, we got close and far, but closer still. Are we one today? Um, Different aspects of our country are democratic, but other parts are leading us to a democratic atrophy, with people being apathetic, the disproportionate role of wealth and affluence and income and wealth inequality in our American political system. So, effectively, looking at this, are we one? I want an answer, yes or no. Or you could say no, but justify it. Were we ever one? Look at the past, in our very distant past. No, but sort of, kind of, more or less. And then we go down here. Are we one today? I don't know. Well, look at this. And then from there, you see how we have all of these bullet points there? What I can do is I can look there and I can look for soundness and validity. I can look for consistency. I can hand this to my professor. I can hand this to a reader. That's someone who looks at and evaluates our work. If you're doing a dissertation or a thesis, we can hand it to one of our readers. We can hand it to an editor, and we can say, can I talk to you about this? Can you look over my outline for me? Tell me if I'm missing something. And if you are, you can go back and fix it. But at the end of the day, when you have a consistent outline and all of your points are consistent, they're sound, and you can back them up by reputable sources, and there are not counterfactuals that will completely undermine your entire enterprise, what you can do at the end of the day, at the end of this project, go through and turn each bullet point in each point of substantiating information, turn it into a sentence. Then clean it up to make it look pretty. And instead of sitting down and just writing, hopefully praying to the gods of, I don't know, systematized institutional evaluations and metrics, instead of lighting a candle to them, you can just put the work in and spend more time working on your ideas than trying to make it look pretty. Because when it comes right down to it with your writing, I want you to show me rather than tell me. If you did this and you submitted this to me, I might expect you to put a little more work into it to clean it up. But if you did something like this and you showed me your sources and you did bullet points for your first exam, maybe even your second exam, I am more interested in your ideas and the flow and consistency, the cogency and coherency of your ideas, and demonstrating that you know how to use sources effectively. I'm more interested in seeing that you know what you're talking about enough to discriminate all the extraneous information. Because let's say under under section 2 or 3 rather. Yeah, that's 2. So this is 4, this is 5. Sorry. Blah. All right. So under this, let's say that like I don't even need this. I don't even need this one. And that would just take up space, and that would just distract, and that would just not keep a good flow. I might have a really good idea right there, but it doesn't fit for the flow, and it doesn't necessarily help support my argument any more than I already have. It's just padding it. Get rid of it. Don't throw padding in. Don't throw extraneous stuff. Don't just fill up this bag of an essay with as much as you can because you think that you don't have enough. Because oftentimes, if you're nervous about that, one thing I've discovered from my writing, in my analyses, in my work, is in public speaking, I've discovered that when I think that I don't have enough, I already have too much. That might be the case with you. You're new at this, so there's no guarantee that it is. But it might be. And if that's the case, follow this pattern and then turn them into sentences. But you can't really evaluate well, for the most part, when you're learning how to do this if you're trying to read through a 2 to 3 page essay when a 1 page outline can tell you everything that you need to know. Don't bury anything. And like I said, with the introduction, tell me your big question. Tell me your big point. Tell me your main bullet points, your section theses, and just say, is our democratic system still democratic? It's damaged, but yes. Why? We are a democracy, according to blah 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 and Robert Dahl, according to Adam Sawerski, according to The Economist, according to Freedom House, these sources with their definitions of democracy, we are a democracy, albeit a flawed democracy. Then were we ever looking at this to see the progression of democratization in the United States? Were we ever one? We were completely flawed at the start, and we've gotten a lot better. Other countries are doing better than we're doing, but this is something else we could talk about. Are we one now? Yes, we are absolutely a democracy now. Looking at The Economist for democratic freedoms with their annual index of democratization, we used to be much, much higher. But right now, I think the number for 2024, because it came out in February, the report from last year, I think that we are now something like 28th on the list of democratic countries. We are no longer, we haven't been for a long time, if ever, the number one democratic country on the planet. But we do have democratic potential. And what causes us to be flawed? Well, on paper and laws, we have certain laws. Most laws that we have, um, they get us close to democracy. But then when it comes right down to it, um, social attitudes, we have people who want to minimize someone's ability to vote, people that don't want to accept the results of elections even after they've been certified and have been investigated to have a level of error and chicanery at sub-marginal levels. And then lastly, looking at, how much power does the individual's vote have according to our democratic values of what we would expect. um, Not as much. And here's a bunch of examples. And then, you know basically just saying that as one sentence each for each point, that tells me what you're going to be telling me. That tells me what you're going to be telling me. And when you tell me what you're going to be telling me, I will be happy because I will be able to figure this out. Am I still recording? That's my question. Yes, I believe so. Am I? Cool. All right. My bad. So, anyway, like I was saying, when we're writing this essay, your big thesis, give me 3 points, and then have substantiary evidence and points under each point. Don't give me filler. And right here and right now, what I did is I just illustrated how to come up with a concept so we can go out there. And keep in mind, I forget how many books I've read on democratic theory and how many articles, journal, not magazine articles like from the Atlantic, but journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, from the American Political Science Association, et cetera, et cetera. I'll go look up sources that I can evaluate my questions. And from there, at the end, I will just re-articulate and reiterate what I had said. And then if I have this really great point that I had to cut out, I'll stick it down at the bottom. I'll stick it underneath, and I will have this in a section that I like to call discussion. Conclusion and discussion. Discussion is the point that you make where it's other stuff that didn't exactly fit, but it was too good to just not completely exclude. Because if you're going to completely exclude it, you might throw out an interesting idea that you could work on next time. Or it might be a juicy little nugget that I, as your professor or reader, would want to explore or recommend that you explore. And just by finding that little kernel of knowledge that might not have had a certain amount of requisite exploration, you're doing everybody a favor by doing that. So I hope this helps. So what you do is you put your outline together, you put your points together, you put your quotes together, and what do? You plug it all in and then you chug. Plug and chug, and this will help you sort your ideas. This will help you figure out exactly what a cogent and coherent essay is going to be. And oftentimes you'll come up with new ideas you would have never thought of. This is a really great recipe to putting an analytical project together. Feel free not to use it, but if you would like to save yourself time and headache. And then lastly, of course, you have the works cited section. And with that, American Psychological Association's good. If you give me MLA, I'm not going to be happy because I don't really like MLA because I'm a political scientist. We do either APSA, American Political Science Association, or American Psychological Association stuff, in style. And with that, basically with style guidelines, with APA or APSA. That's what we work with. American Psychological Association, or I should put this down here, American Psychological Association or American Political Science Association, APA or APSA. There's not much of a difference, but effectively, anytime you're paraphrasing, anytime that you're quoting, anytime that you're trying to tell me an idea that's not exclusively yours, if you don't attribute it, you are plagiarizing. Even if you're not intending to do that, you're essentially stealing somebody else's work and ideas. And you can get in big trouble for that. You can get expelled for that, kicked out of a class, etc., etc. Don't do it. Do not do it. But in the paragraphs itself, you can cite things. And you can do so by just telling me the author. Like, let's say that we're using a guy by the name of Smith. So we can say Smith, 1970, page 70, something like that. Or we can go Smith, 1970. Or if we've already said, according to Daniel Smith in his book, blah, 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 da 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 da, and then I'll just put the date because I'm referring to a particular thing by Smith. Um, if there's other things by Smith, or I could just put Smith. If I'm just talking, I just have one Smith out of my bibliography, I can say Smith. Additionally, that helps so that way if I write Smith, then I can just say the idea without saying what Daniel Smith said. No, because I'm attributing it to Daniel Smith. And if I can even sometimes get away with it if I say, and Daniel Smith further says blah, 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 blah. This is a shorthand. You're telling me exactly where you got your ideas and information so that way you don't plagiarize. And at the end of the thing, what you do, I think MLA, you say the pages that you got something from. You don't do that with this. So we'll say Smith, I'm making up an author, Daniel, period, 1970, period. Then I put in italics, I'll put fake book for essay. There's always an indent there, right? So there's always an indent. Fake book for essay, and then I'm going to put New York, and then I'll put, it's a colon, Harcourt, or Random House, or we'll do London for Oxford University Press. All right, that's how we do that. And if we have multiple authors, Smith, comma, Daniel, and let's say we have three, otherwise you'll just do and, no comma right there. Then we'll say like Thomas, the painter Kincaid, Thomas Kincaid, and Cheryl Hines. How do you spell her name? She was an act. She was on Curb Your Enthusiasm. She's currently married to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cheryl Hines. Period. We'll say recently, so we'll do 2026 or 25. That hasn't happened yet. Sorry about that. 2025. It came out this year, and then period, and then let's say that this or um sorry, it's in parentheses. I haven't done this in a while. Period. Okay, so it's in parentheses, I believe. I have to check it again. But anyway, you see where I'm going with this. So let's say this is from a journal. So we'll say fake article, period, and we'll go to, and we'll put this in italics, the Journal of Fake Stuff, and then period, and then we talk about um, we put in the volume and issue, and then if it's a particular thing you got online, then you put accessed on let's say 22nd March 2025. It's all in style guidelines. But, try your best. Try your best with this. You can find this. Purdue University has something good on this. But basically, you just want to tell me where you got your ideas. So as long as you cite where you got your ideas and it is mostly correct, I'm not going to dock you for it, because this might be the first time you're really putting a concerted effort to using a lot of sources. Might be your first college class you're doing that, but it's handy to know how to do this stuff. And looking at this, I hope that this little lecture that I just gave you some good ideas. I hope that it also helped you figure out how to write a better essay. And I hope that in writing a better essay, you'll give me a better essay and it'll be more fun for me to read. So, everyone has to learn how to do this. It's not easy, it can be grueling, but once you got the pattern down, you can achieve amazing things in this. Well, enjoy your spring break, class. Enjoy the remainder of your spring break. I'm going to look online and check what you've submitted. If you get it to me by Thursday, I will give you a first review. Otherwise, good luck. All right. Have a great spring break, people.